The dusty boarding house door slammed shut behind Olivia Norwood as she stumbled into the sweltering June heat of Agua Caliente, Arizona, clutching a worn carpetbag that held everything she owned in this world, which amounted to one dress, a threadbare nightgown, and the few coins she had left after paying for 2 weeks of lodging. The year was 1882, and the silver mines had brought fortune seekers from every corner of the country to this sun-scorched town nestled in the Rocky Hills. But fortune had not smiled upon Olivia. She had arrived 3 months ago with her Aunt Constance, who had died suddenly of fever, leaving Olivia alone in a place where she knew no one and had nothing to her name except the dress on her back. The fabric clung to her skin as she walked down the main street, aware of eyes watching her from beneath hat brims and through dusty windows. At 22 years old, she had never imagined her life would come to this. Back in Philadelphia, she had been a seamstress in a respectable shop, but when Aunt Constance had written about opportunities in the Arizona territory, about how a woman with skills could make a real living, Olivia had packed her things and headed west. She had not counted on her aunt's weak constitution, nor on how quickly illness could take a person in this harsh climate. Every evening after her shift washing dishes at the Lucky Dollar Saloon, she returned to her tiny room and washed her one dress in the basin, hanging it to dry overnight while she slept in her nightgown. By morning, the desert air had done its work, and she would put on the same dress again, slightly more faded than the day before. The other women at the boarding house whispered about her, but they did not offer help. In Agua Caliente, everyone had their own struggles. Jackson Xerxes had noticed her the first week she started working at the Lucky Dollar. He was not the kind of man who spent much time in saloons, preferring the quiet of the range where he worked cattle for the XX Ranch. But he came into town every Saturday for supplies and allowed himself one whiskey before heading back out. He was 26, tall and lean from years of hard work, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of sage after rain. He had built a life for himself here, after drifting through Texas and New Mexico, finally finding a place where his skills with horses and cattle were valued enough that he had been able to save money, build a small cabin on land he leased, and dream of one day owning his own spread. The first time he saw Olivia carrying a tray of dirty glasses through the crowded saloon, nearly knocked over by a drunk miner, he had stood up instinctively, ready to intervene. But she had steadied herself with remarkable grace, her chin held high despite the exhaustion evident in her face. She wore a simple brown dress that had seen better days, but she moved with quiet dignity that set her apart from the painted women who worked the saloon's second floor. Something about her made him think of wildflowers growing through rock, determined and unexpectedly beautiful. He started coming to town more often, always sitting at the same table in the corner where he could watch her work without being obvious about it. He noticed how she never complained, even when customers were rude. He noticed how her hands were red and raw from the hot water and lye soap. He noticed that she wore the same dress every single day, though it was always clean and neatly mended. One Saturday evening in early July, as the sun turned the sky the color of copper and the heat finally began to ease, Jackson finished his whiskey and approached the bar where Olivia was stacking clean glasses. She looked up at him with startled green eyes, a strand of auburn hair escaping from the bun at the nape of her neck. "Evening, miss," he said, his voice quiet and steady. "I was wondering if you might have a moment to talk when your shift ends." Olivia's first instinct was wariness. Men in saloons rarely wanted to talk to women for respectable reasons, but something about this particular man seemed different. He held his hat in his hands, his posture respectful, and his eyes met hers directly without the leering quality she had grown accustomed to seeing. "My shift ends at 8, she said carefully. "I suppose I could spare a few minutes." "I will wait outside," Jackson said, nodding his thanks before replacing his hat and walking out into the evening air. Olivia's heart hammered in her chest for the next hour as she finished her work. She did not know what this cowboy wanted with her, but she found herself hoping it was not an improper proposition. There had been something in his manner that suggested decency, a quality she had not often encountered in Agua Caliente. When she finally stepped outside, untying her apron and folding it over her arm, she found him leaning against the post at the end of the wooden sidewalk, watching the last rays of sunlight disappear behind the mountains. "Mister," she began, realizing she did not know his name. Xerxes, he said, turning to face her. Jackson Xerxes, but most folks just call me Jack. I am Olivia Norwood. She waited, her hands folded in front of her, trying not to show how nervous she felt. Miss Norwood, I hope you will forgive my directness, but I have noticed you have been working very hard these past months. Jackson paused, choosing his words carefully. I have also noticed you seem to be in some difficult circumstances. Olivia felt heat rise to her cheeks, and it had nothing to do with the Arizona weather. I manage just fine, Mr. Xerxes. I am sure you do, he said gently. I did not mean to offend. I only wanted to say that if you needed anything, help of any kind, I would be glad to offer it. I do not accept charity, Olivia said, her voice firmer than she felt. She had her pride, even if it was about all she had left. It would not be charity, Jackson replied. I run a small ranch about 10 miles north of here. I've been thinking I could use someone to help with the household, maybe do some cooking and mending. The pay would be fair, and there's a spare room in the cabin. Clean work, respectable. Olivia stared at him, trying to determine if this was some elaborate scheme. Why would you offer this to me? You do not even know me. Jackson met her gaze steadily. I know you show up every day and work hard. I know you carry yourself with dignity even when folks do not treat you with respect. And I know what it is like to be alone in a hard place with no one to turn to. I have been there myself. Something in his voice told Olivia he was speaking truth. She saw no deception in his face, only an earnest desire to help. Still, she hesitated. Going to live on a ranch with a man she barely knew was not without risk. I would need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, Jackson said. I come to town every Saturday. You can let me know then, or you can send word to the XX Ranch if you decide sooner. No pressure either way. He tipped his hat to her and walked away toward where his horse was tied, leaving Olivia standing in the gathering darkness, her mind spinning with possibilities and concerns. She did think about it. She thought about it through every plate she washed, every drunk she avoided, every night she scrubbed her one dress and hung it to dry. She thought about how her hands ached and how tired she was of living in a single room with walls so thin she could hear every sound from the neighboring rooms. She thought about how she was barely surviving, let alone building any kind of future. The following Saturday, when Jackson came into the saloon and took his usual table, Olivia finished serving another customer and then walked straight over to him. I will take your offer, she said without preamble, but I want to be clear that I expect proper sleeping arrangements and respectful treatment. Jackson stood immediately, relief evident on his face. You will have your own room with a lock on the door. You have my word that I will treat you with nothing but respect. When would you want me to start? Olivia asked. Whenever you are ready. I can bring a wagon tomorrow if that suits you. Tomorrow then, Olivia agreed, feeling both terrified and hopeful for the first time in months. True to his word, Jackson arrived at the boarding house the next morning with a small wagon. Olivia's possessions fit easily in the back, her carpet bag looking lonely in all that empty space. She climbed onto the bench seat beside him, very aware of the curious and judgmental stares from the other boarders watching from the windows. As they rolled out of Agua Caliente, heading north on a dusty track that wound through rocky hills dotted with sage and mesquite, Jackson kept the horses at an easy pace. The morning sun was already fierce, but the motion of the wagon created a slight breeze. Tell me about yourself, Miss Norwood, Jackson said after they had traveled in silence for a while. Where are you from originally? Philadelphia, Olivia said, relaxing slightly. Normal conversation seemed safe enough. I worked as a seamstress there. My aunt wrote to me about opportunities out here, and I came to help her with a business venture. But she died of fever not long after I arrived. I'm sorry for your loss, Jackson said sincerely. That must have been difficult, being alone in a strange place. It has been challenging, Olivia admitted. What about you? How did you come to be in Arizona? Jackson told her about growing up on a small farm in Missouri, losing both his parents to cholera when he was 18, and spending the next several years drifting west, working ranches in Kansas, Texas, and New Mexico before ending up in Arizona territory. He had worked for the XX Ranch for 3 years before the owner, an aging rancher named Samuel Wright, had allowed him to lease some land and run his own small herd alongside the main operation. It is not much yet, Jackson said, but it is mine. Well, it will be mine once I finish paying for the land. I have about 30 head of cattle and 5 horses. The cabin is small but solid. I built it myself." Olivia heard the pride in his voice and found herself warming to this quiet, hard-working man. There was something reassuring about his steadiness, the way he seemed to consider his words before speaking. The ranch, when they arrived, was modest but well kept. The cabin was indeed small, perhaps 20 feet square, built of rough-hewn logs with a stone chimney. Behind it stood a sturdy barn and several corrals. Cattle grazed in the distance, and she could see a small creek winding through the property, lined with cottonwood trees that offered precious shade. Jackson helped her down from the wagon and carried her carpet bag inside. The cabin's interior was dim and cool after the bright sunlight. There was a main room with a stone fireplace, a simple kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a rough-hewn table with 2 chairs, and 2 doors leading to what must be the bedrooms. "That one is yours," Jackson said, pointing to the door on the left. "I put fresh linens on the bed yesterday and cleaned it out. The door has a lock, like I promised." Olivia opened the door to find a small but clean room with a narrow bed, a trunk at its foot, a small table with a basin and pitcher, and even a tiny window that looked out toward the creek. It was simple, but it was the nicest space she had occupied since leaving Philadelphia. "It is perfect," she said softly, turning back to Jackson with genuine gratitude. "Thank you." "I will let you get settled," Jackson said, looking pleased by her reaction. "I need to check on the herd, but I will be back by noon. There is food in the larder if you get hungry before then. Make yourself at home." After he left, Olivia sat on the edge of the bed and allowed herself to breathe deeply for what felt like the first time in months. The room smelled of fresh air and pine. Through the window she could hear birds singing in the cottonwoods. It was so different from the noise and chaos of the boarding house, from the smoke and shouts of the saloon. She unpacked her meager belongings, hanging her nightgown on a peg on the wall and laying out her hairbrush and the few other personal items she owned. Then she explored the main room more thoroughly. Jackson had not exaggerated about the food situation. The larder was well stocked with basics: flour, beans, salt pork, coffee, dried apples, and even some precious sugar. She found eggs in a basket and realized he must keep chickens somewhere. The cabin, while clean, clearly lacked a woman's touch. There were no curtains on the windows, no rugs on the floor, no decoration of any kind. It was purely functional, the home of a man who spent most of his time working outdoors. Olivia felt her seamstress instincts stirring. With some fabric and time, she could make this place more comfortable. When Jackson returned at midday, he found Olivia had prepared a simple meal of fried eggs, beans, and fresh coffee. The table was set, and she had found a jar and filled it with wildflowers, placing it in the center. "This is nice," Jackson said, genuine surprise in his voice as he washed his hands in the basin by the door. "I usually just eat cold beans straight from the pot." They sat down to eat, and Olivia found herself relaxing into the rhythm of normal domestic life. Jackson proved to be easy company, asking her opinion on things and listening when she spoke. He told her about the ranch, explaining that he checked on the cattle twice daily, repaired fences and equipment as needed, and was slowly building up his herd with the long-term goal of buying more land. "What would you like me to do here?" Olivia asked. "You mentioned cooking and mending, but I want to be sure I understand what you expect." "Honestly, whatever you're comfortable with," Jackson said. "And I'm not much of a cook, as you might have guessed. If you could handle meals, that would be a blessing. I do have some shirts that need mending. Beyond that, you are welcome to keep the place as you see fit. I know I said you would be helping with the household, but really, I just thought you could use a better situation than what you had. The work does not need to be constant." Olivia studied him across the table. "You are a strange man, Mr. Xerxes. Most people do not offer help without expecting something significant in return." "Most people did not have a stranger give them a chance when they needed it most," Jackson replied. "When I first came to Arizona, I was down to my last dollar, and Sam Wright gave me a job based on nothing but my word that I was a hard worker. He could have turned me away. He did not. I figure I should pass that kind of kindness forward when I can." It was the most he had said about his motivations, and Olivia felt something shift inside her. This man was genuinely good, a rare quality in her experience. She found herself wanting to know more about him, to understand what had shaped him into someone capable of such quiet generosity. The days that followed fell into a comfortable pattern. Jackson rose before dawn to check on the herd and tend to the horses. Olivia woke to make coffee and breakfast, learning his preferences and taking satisfaction in seeing him eat well before heading out for the day's work. While he was gone, she cleaned the cabin, washed clothes in the creek, tended to the small vegetable garden she discovered behind the barn, and began mending his shirts and socks, all of which showed signs of long wear. In the evenings, they ate dinner together and talked. Jackson proved to be an excellent listener, asking thoughtful questions about her life in Philadelphia, her work as a seamstress, and her dreams for the future. In turn, he shared stories of his travels, the characters he had met, and the harsh lessons he had learned about surviving in the West. One evening, about 2 weeks after her arrival, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset in a blaze of orange and purple, Jackson cleared his throat in a way that told Olivia he had something particular to say. "I need to go into Agua Caliente tomorrow," he said. "I was thinking you might like to come along. We could get some supplies, and maybe you could pick out some fabric or whatever else you might need." Olivia glanced down at her dress, the same brown one she had worn every day for months. She had washed it thoroughly when she arrived at the ranch, and it was clean, but the fabric was thin in places, and the color had faded to an indeterminate shade between brown and gray. "I appreciate the thought," she said carefully, "but I do not have money for fabric or anything else." "I know," Jackson said simply. "I'm offering to buy it. You have been working hard, and you should have more than one dress. It is not charity," he added quickly, seeing her stiffen. "Consider it part of your wages, room, board, and necessities. That is the arrangement." "You have not mentioned wages before," Olivia pointed out. "I should have," Jackson admitted. "That was an oversight on my part. How does $20 a month sound, plus room and board?" Olivia's breath caught. $20 a month was fair pay, better than what she had earned at the saloon when you factored in the cost of her boarding house room. "That is generous." "It is what is right," Jackson said. "So will you come to town tomorrow? You should have what you need." The next morning, they made the trip back to Agua Caliente. Olivia felt strange returning to the town that had seemed so inhospitable just weeks ago. Everything looked the same, but she felt different. She held her head higher, feeling less desperate and more secure. Jackson drove the wagon to the general store, a large building that smelled of coffee, leather, and the peculiar mix of all the goods crammed onto its shelves. The proprietor, a balding man named Henry Larson, greeted Jackson warmly before his eyes slid to Olivia with poorly disguised curiosity. "Miss Norwood will be picking out some things," Jackson said easily. "Put it on my account." "Of course, Jack," Henry said, his manner becoming more respectful when he realized Olivia was under Jackson's protection. "Miss, we have fabric over on that side, and if you need anything else, just let me know." Olivia moved to the fabric section, her seamstress eye immediately assessing quality and suitability. There was not a huge selection, but there was enough. She chose a practical dark blue cotton for an everyday dress, a lighter gray cotton for a second work dress, and then, allowing herself one indulgence, a deep green fabric that reminded her of forest shadows. It would make a nice Sunday dress if she was careful with it. "You will need thread, needles, anything else?" Jackson asked, appearing at her elbow. "I have needles," Olivia said, "but thread would be helpful, and perhaps some muslin for undergarments." Jackson did not blink at the mention of undergarments, simply nodding and asking Henry to add those items to the order. He also picked up several other supplies: coffee, sugar, flour, salt, and a few tins of peaches that made Olivia smile despite herself. Tinned fruit was a luxury she had not enjoyed in a long time. As Henry was wrapping their purchases, a woman entered the store, and Olivia recognized her immediately. Margaret Sullivan had been one of the other boarders, a widow who worked as a laundress. She had never been unkind to Olivia, but she had never been friendly either. "Olivia Norwood," Margaret said, surprise evident in her voice. "I heard you had left town. Took up with a cowboy, the gossip said." Olivia felt Jackson tense beside her, but she kept her voice level. "I took a position as housekeeper for Mr. Xerxes here. He runs a ranch north of town." Margaret's eyes traveled from Olivia to Jackson and back again, clearly trying to determine the true nature of their relationship. "How fortunate for you," she said, her tone impossible to read. "Very fortunate," Olivia agreed firmly. "Mr. Xerxes has been nothing but a gentleman and a fair employer." "That's good to hear," Margaret said, and Olivia thought she detected a note of genuine relief in the woman's voice. Lord knows there are enough men in this territory who were neither of those things. I am glad you landed on your feet." After Margaret left, Jackson helped Olivia carry the packages to the wagon. "Are you all right?" he asked quietly. "I know how gossip can be in small towns." "I am fine," Olivia said, and she meant it. Whatever people chose to believe about her situation, she knew the truth. She was living respectably, working honestly, and for the first time since her aunt's death, she felt like she had a future that extended beyond mere survival. Back at the ranch, Olivia spent the next several days cutting and sewing her new dresses. She worked in the main room where the light was best, sitting by the window with her sewing basket. Jackson would come in from his work and find her bent over her needle, fabric spread across her lap, completely absorbed in her task. "You're really skilled at that," he observed one evening, watching her set nearly invisible stitches along a hem. "I should be," Olivia said with a small smile. "I started sewing when I was 6 years old. My mother was a seamstress too. She died when I was 16, but by then she had taught me everything she knew." "Do you miss Philadelphia?" Jackson asked, settling into the other chair with a cup of coffee. Olivia paused in her sewing, considering the question. "I miss some things. The theater, the shops, the way you could walk down streets and see hundreds of people. But I do not miss the crowds or the noise, and I do not miss working in a shop where I made beautiful things for other people to wear while I could barely afford my own rent." She looked up at him. "I think I like it here better. It is quieter, but it feels more honest somehow." "I understand that," Jackson said. "The West is hard, but it is also free in a way that the places I came from never were. A man can be judged by what he does here, not just by who his family was or how much money he started with." They fell into a comfortable silence, the kind that happens between people who are becoming genuinely comfortable with each other. Olivia returned to her sewing, and Jackson sat with his coffee, watching the last light fade from the sky through the open door. By the end of July, Olivia had completed all 3 dresses and several new chemises and petticoats. She looked like a different woman from the one who had arrived at the ranch, no longer wearing the same faded brown dress day after day. Her hands were healing too, no longer red and raw from saloon dishwater. The good food and regular rest had put color back in her cheeks, and a brightness in her eyes that had been missing. Jackson noticed the changes, though he tried not to stare. Olivia had always been pretty in a quiet way, but now she seemed to glow with health and contentment. He found himself looking forward to the end of each workday, when he could come back to the cabin and find her there, cooking dinner or mending by the window or just sitting on the porch, enjoying the evening air. The cabin had become a home rather than just a place to sleep, and he knew it was entirely because of her presence. He was falling in love with her. He had probably been half in love with her from that first night in the saloon when she had picked herself up with such dignity after nearly being knocked down. But now, living with her, seeing her smile over breakfast and hearing her hum while she worked, he was completely lost. The problem was that he had no idea how she felt about him, and he was terrified of ruining the comfortable arrangement they had by revealing feelings that might not be welcome. Olivia, for her part, was experiencing similar confusion. She had grown to care for Jackson far beyond simple gratitude. She loved the way he treated her as an equal, asking her opinion on ranch matters and listening thoughtfully to her responses. She loved his quiet strength and the gentle way he handled the horses. She loved how he never made her feel like she was a burden or like she owed him anything beyond the work she already did. But she could not be sure if his kindness was simply his nature or if it meant something more. He had never touched her beyond helping her down from the wagon or handing her something across the table. He had never said anything that could be construed as romantic. She told herself it was better this way, that she should be grateful for what she had rather than hoping for more, but her heart did not listen to such practical advice. In mid-August, a fierce thunderstorm rolled through the territory. Olivia had never experienced weather like it. The sky turned almost black in the middle of the afternoon, and the wind howled around the cabin with such force that she worried it might tear the roof off. Rain came down in sheets, pounding against the windows and drumming on the roof. Jackson had been out checking on the herd when the storm hit. Olivia stood by the window, straining to see through the deluge, increasingly worried as the minutes stretched on with no sign of him. Lightning cracked across the sky, followed almost immediately by thunder that shook the entire cabin. She wrapped her arms around herself, trying not to imagine all the terrible things that could happen to a man caught out in weather like this. When the door finally burst open and Jackson stumbled in, soaked to the skin and breathing hard, Olivia felt such relief that she crossed the room without thinking and threw her arms around him. "Thank God," she breathed against his wet shirt. "I was so worried." Jackson stood very still for a moment, clearly surprised by her embrace. Then his arms came up around her, holding her carefully. "I'm all right," he said, his voice rough. "Had to get the horses into the barn. They were spooked by the lightning." Olivia pulled back suddenly, realizing what she had done. "I'm sorry. I should not have you soaked through. You should get into dry clothes before you catch a chill." But she could not quite make herself step away from him, and Jackson was not releasing her either. They stood there, water dripping from his clothes onto the floor, staring at each other in the dim light of the storm-darkened cabin. Something had shifted between them in that embrace, an acknowledgement of feelings that had been building for weeks. "Olivia," Jackson said softly, raising one hand to cup her cheek. His palm was wet and cold, but she leaned into the touch. "I need to tell you something, even though it might change everything between us." "Tell me," she whispered, her heart hammering. "I am in love with you," he said simply. "I think I have been since the first time I saw you. I know this arrangement was supposed to be just about work, about me helping you out of a bad situation, but somewhere along the way it became something more, at least for me. And if you do not feel the same way, I will understand, and nothing has to change. You can stay here as long as you want, and I will never mention this again. But I had to tell you because keeping it inside was getting harder every single day." Olivia felt tears spring to her eyes, but they were happy tears. "You foolish man," she said, her voice shaking with emotion. "I love you too. I've been so afraid to hope that you might care for me as more than just your housekeeper." Jackson's face transformed with joy and relief. He pulled her close again, this time with no hesitation, no careful distance. She could feel his heart pounding against her cheek as fast as her own. "Can I kiss you?" he asked, and she loved that he asked, that even now he was careful of her wishes. "Yes," she breathed, and then his lips were on hers, warm despite the cold rain that still clung to him. The kiss was gentle at first, tentative, as if they were both afraid of breaking something precious. But then it deepened, weeks of restrained longing pouring out in that one perfect moment. When they finally pulled apart, both breathless, Jackson was smiling wider than Olivia had ever seen. "You should probably still let me change into dry clothes," he said, laughter in his voice. "I'm getting you soaked." Olivia looked down and saw that her dress was indeed wet from being pressed against him, but she did not care. "Go," she said, giving him a gentle push toward his room. "I will make coffee and get the fire built up." While Jackson changed, Olivia moved around the cabin in a daze, building up the fire in the stove, setting the coffee to boil, trying to process what had just happened. He loved her. Jackson loved her. The knowledge sang through her veins like music, making everything seem brighter and more alive. When he emerged in dry clothes, his hair still damp and curling even more than usual, she handed him a cup of coffee, and they sat together by the fire, so close that their shoulders touched. "What happens now?" Olivia asked. "I mean, between us. What do we do?" Jackson took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "I know what I want to do. I want to marry you, make you my wife in every way that matters. But I do not want to rush you or make you feel pressured. We can take as much time as you need." "I do not need much time," Olivia said, turning to look at him directly. "I am 22 years old, and I have never felt about anyone the way I feel about you. I know my own mind, and I know that I want to spend my life with you. So yes, I will marry you, Jackson Xerxes, and I will be proud to be your wife." Jackson set down his coffee cup and kissed her again, deeper this time, with more confidence. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the cabin, wrapped in each other's arms, they had never felt warmer or safer or more certain about the future. They decided to marry as soon as it could be arranged. Jackson made another trip into Agua Caliente to speak with the minister of the small church on the edge of town. Reverend Thomas was a practical man who had seen many frontier marriages and asked few questions as long as both parties were willing and of age. They set the date for the last Saturday in August, giving Olivia time to make herself a proper wedding dress. She chose the green fabric she had bought, the one she had originally intended for a Sunday dress. Working by candlelight in the evenings while Jackson pretended to read but mostly just watched her with open adoration, she created something simple but beautiful. The dress had long sleeves, a fitted bodice, and a skirt that draped elegantly without being too full. She added small tucks and details that showed off her skill, wanting to look her best when she married the man she loved. Jackson, meanwhile, rode to the main ranch house to speak with Sam Wright, the owner of the Double X. Sam was in his 60s, weathered by decades of hard work, but his eyes were still sharp and kind. He listened as Jackson explained the situation, asking for a few days off for the wedding and for a loan to buy a ring. "About time you settled down," Sam said with a chuckle. "I've seen you these past months, coming into town more regular, and I figured there was a woman involved. She must be something special." "She is," Jackson said simply. "She is everything." Sam opened his safe and pulled out a small leather pouch. "My wife, God rest her soul. She passed 15 years ago. She had a few pieces of jewelry, and I've been keeping them safe all this time. Never had children to pass them to. Why do not you take a look? See if there's anything suitable. I would be honored if one of her rings could be part of starting your marriage." Jackson felt his throat tighten with emotion as Sam poured several pieces onto his desk. There were 2 rings, a brooch, and a delicate gold chain. One of the rings was ornate, clearly expensive, but the other was simpler, a gold band with a small garnet set in the center, surrounded by tiny seed pearls. It was beautiful without being ostentatious, exactly the kind of thing he thought Olivia would love. "This one," Jackson said, picking up the garnet ring. "If you are sure." "I am sure," Sam said firmly. "You have been a good man and a hard worker. You deserve happiness, Jack. Take the ring with my blessing and bring your bride around to meet me sometime after you are settled." Jackson rode back to the cabin with the ring wrapped carefully in his handkerchief, feeling like the luckiest man in Arizona territory. When he showed it to Olivia that evening, her eyes filled with tears. "It is beautiful," she whispered, touching the garnet gently. "Are you sure you want to give this to me?" "I've never been more sure of anything," Jackson said, slipping it onto her finger. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her all along. The wedding day arrived with clear blue skies and temperatures slightly cooler than they had been, as if the weather itself was cooperating. Olivia dressed carefully in her green dress, pinning her hair up in a style more elaborate than her usual simple bun, and adding a small wreath of wildflowers that Jackson had surprised her with that morning. They rode into Agua Caliente together, both dressed in their best. Jackson wore a white shirt Olivia had made him, black pants, and his best boots, polished until they gleamed. He looked handsome enough to take Olivia's breath away, and the way he looked at her made her feel like the most beautiful woman in the world. The church was small and plain, but Reverend Thomas greeted them warmly. To Olivia's surprise, a few people had gathered to witness the ceremony. Margaret Sullivan was there, having somehow heard about the wedding, and she smiled at Olivia with what looked like genuine pleasure. Henry Larson from the general store had come, along with his wife Martha, and Sam Wright had ridden in from the ranch, his weathered face creased in a broad smile. The ceremony itself was simple and short. Jackson and Olivia stood before the minister and spoke their vows in clear, steady voices. When Jackson slipped a second ring onto Olivia's finger, a plain gold band to go with the engagement ring, his hands trembled slightly, the only sign of his nervousness. "You may kiss your bride," Reverend Thomas said with a smile, and Jackson did, sweetly and tenderly, while the small gathering applauded. Afterward, Martha Larson insisted they come back to their house for a small celebration. She had prepared a cake and lemonade, and the group spent a pleasant hour toasting the new couple and sharing stories. Margaret pulled Olivia aside at one point, squeezing her hand. "I am happy for you," she said quietly. "You deserve this after all you went through. And that husband of yours, he looks at you like you hung the moon. That is the way a man should look at his wife." "Thank you," Olivia said, surprised by the kindness but grateful for it. By late afternoon, Jackson and Olivia made their excuses and headed back to the ranch. They had both been eager to return home, to begin their married life in earnest. The ride seemed longer than usual, both of them acutely aware that everything had changed between them. They were husband and wife now, bound together in the eyes of God and the law. When they arrived at the cabin, Jackson pulled the wagon to a stop and turned to Olivia. "I know this is going to sound foolish, but I am nervous," he admitted. "I want everything to be perfect for you." "It already is," Olivia assured him, touching his face gently. "I am married to the man I love. Nothing else matters." Jackson helped her down from the wagon, and then, to her surprise, swept her up in his arms. "I am carrying my bride over the threshold properly," he said with a grin, and Olivia laughed, wrapping her arms around his neck. He carried her into the cabin and set her down gently. The space looked exactly as it had when they left that morning, but somehow it felt different now. This was their home, officially and completely. They stood facing each other, the weight of the moment making them both a bit shy despite the passion they had expressed in their kisses before the wedding. "I love you," Jackson said, taking her hands in his. "I promise I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret marrying me." "I could never regret this," Olivia said. "You saved me, Jackson, not just from poverty or from washing dishes in a saloon. You saved me from giving up hope. You showed me kindness when I needed it most, and you never asked for anything in return. You gave me new dresses when I had nothing else to wear but what I washed every night, and you did it without making a fuss, without making me feel small or ashamed. That kind of generosity, that kind of goodness, it is rare. I love you for it, and for 100 other reasons." They came together then, kissing with all the pent-up passion of months of restrained longing. Jackson's hands tangled in her carefully pinned hair, sending pins scattering and releasing the auburn waves to fall around her shoulders. Olivia's fingers worked at the buttons of his shirt, wanting to feel his skin against hers, wanting all the barriers between them gone. They moved to Jackson's room, which would now be their shared room. The bed was larger than the one in Olivia's small chamber, and Jackson had put fresh sheets on it that morning, though he had been too shy to mention it at the time. Now Olivia noticed and felt her heart swell with tenderness for this man who was thoughtful even about the smallest details. Their coming together was sweet and passionate, tender and urgent all at once. Jackson was careful with her, checking to make sure she was comfortable, that he was not hurting her. Olivia had never experienced such consideration, such genuine care for her pleasure and well-being. When they finally moved together as one, she felt complete in a way she had never imagined possible. Afterward, they lay tangled together, Olivia's head on Jackson's chest, listening to his heartbeat slow. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her shoulder, and she had never felt so content, so absolutely at peace. "I did not know it could be like this," she murmured. "Like what?" Jackson asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. "So perfect, so right." She lifted her head to look at him. "I love you so much." "I love you too," he said, cupping her face and kissing her again. "More than I ever thought possible." They spent their first night as husband and wife, learning each other, talking and laughing and loving, watching moonlight spill through the window and feeling like the rest of the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them and this perfect bubble of happiness. The weeks that followed were blissful. They fell into new routines, this time as partners in every sense. Olivia still cooked and kept the house, but Jackson insisted on helping when he could, washing dishes or carrying water from the creek. They worked together on projects around the ranch, with Olivia proving surprisingly handy at tasks like mending fences and helping with the horses. In the evenings after supper, they would sit together on the porch, Jackson's arm around Olivia's shoulders, watching the sunset and talking about their plans for the future. Jackson wanted to expand the herd, buy more land, maybe eventually build a bigger house. Olivia wanted to start a vegetable garden big enough to sell produce in town, maybe even take in some sewing work if there was a demand. "We could do all of that," Jackson said. "Together, we can build something really good here." By October, Olivia suspected she might be pregnant. She waited another few weeks to be sure before telling Jackson, wanting to give him the news when she was certain. When she finally told him one evening as they were getting ready for bed, his reaction was everything she could have hoped for. "A baby?" he said, his voice full of wonder. He placed his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby?" "In the spring," Olivia confirmed, smiling at his obvious joy. "April, I think, if my calculations are correct." Jackson pulled her into his arms, holding her carefully as if she might break. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said. "First by marrying me, and now this, a child, our child." "Are you hoping for a boy or a girl?" Olivia asked. "I do not care," Jackson said honestly. "As long as the baby is healthy and you come through the birth safely, that is all that matters." Olivia felt tears sting her eyes. She had heard too many stories of men who cared only about having sons, who saw their wives as nothing more than vessels for producing heirs. Jackson's genuine concern for her well-being above all else was just one more reminder of how lucky she was to have found him. The winter months passed slowly but contentedly. Jackson insisted that Olivia not overwork herself, taking on even more of the household chores than before. She protested that she was not an invalid, but she secretly loved how protective he had become. As her belly began to swell with the growing baby, Jackson would place his hands on it every night, talking softly to the child within, telling it stories about the ranch and making promises about all the things they would do together. They spent Christmas quietly, just the two of them, exchanging small gifts. Jackson had carved Olivia a beautiful box for her sewing supplies, complete with compartments for different types of thread and notions. Olivia had made Jackson a warm winter coat from wool she had traded eggs and vegetables for in town, working on it secretly while he was out with the herd. "This is the best Christmas I have ever had," Jackson said as they sat by the fire that evening, Olivia leaning against him with his hand resting on her rounded belly. "Better than when you were a child?" Olivia asked. "My childhood Christmases were good, but they were a long time ago," Jackson said. "This is different. This is about the family we are creating, about having everything I ever wanted right here in this room." In early March, a traveling doctor came through Agua Caliente, and Jackson insisted on taking Olivia to town to be examined. Dr. Martin was an older man who had seen countless frontier births, and he pronounced both Olivia and the baby healthy. "Should be an easy delivery far as I can tell," he said. "Your wife is strong and healthy. Just make sure she gets plenty of rest in these last weeks and send for the midwife when her time comes. There is a good midwife in town, Mary Chen. She knows what she's doing." Jackson paid the doctor and then took Olivia to the general store, where he insisted on buying everything Dr. Martin had suggested: extra sheets, soft flannel for baby clothes, and various other supplies they might need. Martha Larson, who was helping in the store that day, pulled Olivia aside. "You are glowing, dear," she said warmly. "Being married to Jack clearly agrees with you. He is a good man, and he will be a wonderful father." "I know," Olivia said, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. It still sometimes overwhelmed her, how dramatically her life had changed in less than a year. She had gone from having nothing, from washing her one dress every night just to have something clean to wear, to having a husband who loved her, a home, and a baby on the way. She had gone from desperation to joy, and it was all because Jackson had seen her struggling and decided to help without making a fuss about it. As if sensing her thoughts, Jackson appeared at her side, slipping his arm around her waist. "Ready to head home?" he asked gently. "Yes," she said, leaning into him. "Let us go home." The baby came on a warm April evening, arriving with the kind of speed that surprised everyone involved. Olivia had felt twinges all day, but thought they were the false pains Dr. Martin had warned her about. By the time she realized this was the real thing, it was too late to send for Mary Chen from town. Jackson, terrified but determined not to show it, helped Olivia through the delivery with surprising competence. He had helped birth countless calves and foals over the years, and while he knew humans were different, he understood the basics. He boiled water, prepared clean sheets, and held Olivia's hand through the contractions, murmuring encouragement. "You can do this," he told her as she gripped his hand hard enough to hurt. "You are the strongest person I know. You have survived things that would have broken other people. You can do this." And she did. Just as the last light was fading from the sky, their son came into the world with a lusty cry that made both parents laugh with relief. Jackson, his hands shaking slightly, cut the cord and wrapped the baby in the soft flannel they had prepared, placing him carefully in Olivia's arms. "A boy," Olivia breathed, tears streaming down her face as she looked at the tiny, perfect face. "We have a son." "He is beautiful," Jackson said, his own eyes wet, "just like his mother. They named him James Samuel Xerxes, James for Jackson's father, and Samuel for Sam Wright, the man who had given Jackson his start in Arizona. Little James was healthy and strong, with his mother's green eyes and his father's dark hair. From the moment he was born, he had both his parents completely wrapped around his tiny fingers. Mary Chen arrived the next morning, having been sent for by Sam Wright, who had stopped by to check on the young couple and been delighted to find he had a namesake. She examined both Olivia and the baby, pronouncing them healthy and scolding Jackson good-naturedly for not sending for her sooner. "You did good work here," she told him, "but next time, you send for me earlier, understand? No need for the father to deliver his own baby if there is a midwife available." "Next time," Jackson promised, though he could not imagine going through that level of fear and stress again. But there was a next time, 2 years later, when Olivia gave birth to a daughter they named Eleanor. And then, 3 years after that, another boy they called Thomas. Mary Chen was present for both deliveries, and while they were easier than James's sudden arrival, Jackson still paced outside nervously until he heard the baby's first cry. The ranch prospered along with the family. True to his dreams, Jackson gradually expanded the herd and purchased more land. Olivia's garden grew larger each year, and she did take in sewing work, becoming known throughout the area for her skill with a needle. The money she earned from sewing she saved carefully, and after 5 years she surprised Jackson with enough money to buy additional cattle. "You did not have to do that," he protested, though he was clearly moved. "That is your money, from your work." "Our money," Olivia corrected. "From our work. We are partners, remember? What is mine is yours, and what is yours is mine. That is what marriage means." They used the money to buy 10 more head of cattle, and those cattle had calves, and gradually the small ranch became a prosperous operation. Jackson hired on 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, good men who lived in a bunkhouse Jackson built behind the barn. The cabin, meanwhile, was expanded. Jackson added 2 more rooms and a proper parlor, giving the growing family more space. Olivia decorated it with curtains she sewed, rugs she bought on trips to Tucson, and furniture Jackson built during the winter months. It became a real home, filled with children's laughter and the comfortable sounds of family life. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Jackson and Olivia stood on the porch of their now much improved home, watching their 3 children play in the yard. James, at 9 years old, was already helping with ranch chores and showing his father's quiet competence. Eleanor, at 7, had her mother's grace and skill with sewing, and 6-year-old Thomas was fearless and adventurous, keeping both parents on their toes. "Do you ever think about where you would be if we had not met?" Jackson asked, pulling Olivia close against his side. "I try not to," Olivia admitted. "It is too frightening to consider. I was so lost, Jackson. I had nothing. I wore the same dress every day and washed it every night because I could not afford another one. I was barely surviving." "And now look at you," Jackson said, pride evident in his voice. "You are thriving. We both are." "Because you saw me," Olivia said, turning to face him. "You saw me struggling, and instead of looking away like most people did, you decided to help. You bought me fabric for new dresses without making me feel like charity. You gave me a home and respect and love. You changed my entire life, Jackson, and you did it without making a fuss. You just quietly did what was right." "I am the one who benefited," Jackson said, touching her face tenderly. "You made this house a home. You gave me children and partnership and joy I never even knew to hope for. Before you, I was just existing, working toward some vague future. You made that future real and worth working for." They kissed, a long, sweet kiss that still held all the passion and promise of their wedding day 10 years earlier. When they pulled apart, Eleanor was making exaggerated gagging sounds while her brothers laughed. "Mama and Papa are being mushy again," she announced. "Get used to it," Jackson called back, grinning. "We are going to be mushy for the rest of our lives." As the sun set over the Arizona hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and gold, the Xerxes family gathered on the porch. Olivia leaned against Jackson, his arm around her waist, surrounded by the children they had created and the life they had built together. She thought about that desperate young woman she had been, arriving in Agua Caliente with nothing but a carpetbag and fading hope. She thought about washing her one dress night after night, trying to maintain dignity when she had so little left. And then she thought about the cowboy who had changed everything without making a fuss, who had seen her worth when she was struggling to see it herself. Jackson had not saved her with grand gestures or dramatic declarations. He had saved her with quiet kindness, with practical help, with respect and patience, and eventually love. "What are you thinking about?" Jackson asked softly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I'm thinking that I'm the luckiest woman in Arizona territory," Olivia said honestly. "I'm thinking about how much I love you and how grateful I am for every single day we have together." "The feeling is entirely mutual," Jackson replied. "You are my heart, Olivia. You and our children are everything that matters." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Arizona sky, the family went inside together. Jackson carried Thomas, who had fallen asleep against his shoulder. Eleanor held Olivia's hand, chattering about something that had happened that day. James walked beside his father, already nearly as tall, talking about the horses. Inside, the lamps were lit, casting warm golden light through the rooms. The house smelled of the bread Olivia had baked that morning and the wildflowers Eleanor had picked and placed in jars around the parlor. It smelled like home, like safety, like love. That night, after the children were tucked into bed and the house was quiet, Jackson and Olivia sat together by the fire, talking softly about their plans for the coming year. They needed to repair the south fence before winter. They should plant more tomatoes in the garden since those had done so well last year. James was old enough to start learning to ride the more spirited horses. Eleanor wanted to learn to make a quilt. Thomas needed new boots again because he was growing so fast. These were the comfortable, ordinary concerns of a prosperous family, and Olivia treasured every mundane detail. She had spent enough time with nothing, with worry and fear as her constant companions. Now she had everything that truly mattered: love, family, security, purpose. "I love you," she said suddenly, interrupting Jackson's explanation of his plan for the new fence. He smiled, that slow, warm smile that still made her heart skip. "I love you too, forever and always." "Forever and always," Olivia agreed, and sealed the promise with a kiss. In the years that followed, the Xerxes family continued to grow and prosper. The ranch became one of the most successful in the territory. Olivia's reputation as a seamstress spread far beyond Agua Caliente, and women traveled from miles away to commission dresses from her. The children grew healthy and strong, eventually marrying and having children of their own. Jackson and Olivia grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. On their 50th wedding anniversary, surrounded by children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, they renewed their vows in the same small church where they had married. Jackson's hair had gone silver, and Olivia's auburn waves were streaked with white, but when they looked at each other, they still saw the desperate young woman in a faded brown dress and the kind cowboy who had offered her a better life. "You saved me," Olivia whispered to Jackson as they danced slowly at the celebration afterward, moving carefully on joints that protested more than they once had. "No," Jackson corrected gently, "we saved each other. You gave my life meaning, Olivia. Everything good I have, everything I am, is because of you." They held each other close as the music played, as their family celebrated around them, as the Arizona sunset painted the sky in glorious color one more time. And in that moment, both of them knew with absolute certainty that they had found exactly what they were meant to find all those years ago in a dusty frontier town: a partner, a love, a home, and a happily ever after that exceeded anything either of them had dared to dream. When Jackson passed away peacefully in his sleep at the age of 82, Olivia held his hand and told him one last time how much she loved him, how grateful she was for the life they had built together. She followed him 6 months later, unable to imagine continuing without her other half. They were buried side by side on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together, with a simple marker that read, "Jackson and Olivia Xerxes, together forever." Their children made sure the ranch stayed in the family, passing it down through generations. And sometimes, when the evening light was just right, people swore they could see two figures sitting on the porch of the old homestead, holding hands and watching the sunset together, still deeply in love even beyond death. The story of the cowboy who had quietly helped a desperate young woman, who had bought her dresses without making a fuss when she had nothing else to wear but what she washed nightly, became a family legend. It was told to children and grandchildren as an example of what real love looked like. Not grand gestures or dramatic proclamations, but simple kindness, practical help, and unwavering devotion through all the ordinary moments that made up a life. And in the end, that was the greatest legacy Jackson and Olivia Xerxes left behind, not the prosperous ranch or the money or the land, but the example of a love built on mutual respect, on seeing each other's worth, and on choosing each other every single day for more than 50 years. It was a love story worthy of the Wild West, full of courage and resilience, and the kind of happy ending that only comes from two people truly committed to building a life together, no matter what challenges they faced along the way.